Good morning, everyone. This week we studied the portion of Tzav, the second portion of the book of Leviticus, and we studied from the book selections from Lekutei Sichot, the second talk. Just a short introduction. The service in the Holy Temple entailed many parts. Part of it, major part, and many priests, many Kohanim would be involved in these sacrifices, daily sacrifices. Part of bringing sacrifices after slaughtering an animal, putting sometimes the entire animal twice a day, a bowl would be placed and burned to ashes together with wood. There are many other sacrifices: flour, wine, oil, and small animals. Sometimes it's doves, etc. They all would be doves. No. They would be placed on the altar on a fire and will be consumed completely by the fire. What happens with the ashes? The remains of those objects is the subject of our discussion. The Torah in this week's portion gives a specific instruction of how to get rid of the ashes. Rashi is bringing two reasons for the instructions, and the Rebbe has an issue with why Rashi bothers with two explanations. And the Rebbe would find a solution that would accommodate for two separate answers, meaning one will not satisfy everything, therefore you need a second one. Let's look at it. Commenting on the verse, he, the Kohen, shall remove his garments, put on alternate garments, and take the ashes outside the camp. In other words, regarding the ashes, there were two commandments. I'm giving it to you now in advance, so it should be easy to study. Every day after every sacrifice, they have to lift the ashes and take it down. There was a place in the ground. There was a little square opening next to the altar where he takes a shovel full of ashes, goes down the altar was very high, goes down the altar and place it there. But that square space would fill up over a few days. Every few days when it was filled, now there is a second task, and that is to remove the ashes outside the Jewish camp in the desert. Now in the tabernacle. In Israel, it was in Jerusalem, outside of Jerusalem. So these are two separate tasks. We are dealing now, the rabbi is talking about, and the Torah tells us to change garments in the one that's done every few days when it was filled up with so much. They would fill up with shovels and carry them, fill them up in bags, I believe, and carrying them outside the camp and dump them there, place them there on the ground. So the Torah tells us in this week's portion, Ufashat, he takes off his garment and he puts on new garments. He, the Kohen, shall remove his garments, put on alternate garments, and take the ashes outside the camp. Rashi explains the words, he shall remove his garments, after noting that this is not an obligation, but merely proper, adequate. In other words, Rashi says, when the Torah says, "Ufoshat es bgodav velovash bgodim acherim," he should remove his garments and place on different garments. Rashi says, first, it is not a commandment, but an advice. It's a good idea to do. And Rashi can continue and gives the reason for this practice, so that while taking out the ashes, he does not soil the garments in which he continuously served in the temple. To offer an analogy, the clothes worn by a servant while cooking a pot of food for his master should not be worn when he serves a cup of wine to his master. Therefore, the Kohen should put on alternate, that is, inferior garments. There are three important points in what I just read. First, Rashi tells us it's not a good idea. It's not obligatory. Second, Rashi says, the reason the Torah advises us to change the garments is because not to soil the garments that is serving God in the temple. In other words, if you would use the same garments, when he comes back, they are soiled. Right. You'll have to use different one. It's not proper. The second thing Rashi tells us is that he's giving us an analogy. He says someone who is cooking in the kitchen, the butcher or the chef, when he serves wine before his master, he needs to change the outfit. Talking about a master or a king, he has to look presentable. You cannot use the same outfit you've been using in the kitchen. And the third thing Rashi tells us is that the garments he's taking out the ashes with are inferior to the regular. In other words, they're made of a lesser quality. Okay, these are the three things that are important for us to know. Again, the first is that he should change garments, so he should not serve God with soiled garments because it's going to get soiled. The second is when he goes back. Second is he's giving us an example, an analogy from a chef or a baker or a chef in the kitchen should not serve wine. And the third, he says those garments are inferior to the regular. Yes, Harry. No, shiraim is leftover from the combination. No, that's ktoret. The spices they would measure every day. They would do a bunch, and they would every day take a handful. Over many years, a little bit will be left over. That's what he's saying. Not about ashes. Yes.
Will this practice be the same when they do the ashes for the red heifer?
The red heifer ashes are holy, and it's done outside the temple, and it was done to sprinkle. They would mix it with water. So there you have to preserve it and save it.
No,
Here they have to get rid of it.
It should be another garment.
Yeah.
Outside the temple?
The red heifer had to have been done outside the temple. Where would they burn it? Outside.
I mean, but once they have the ashes sprinkling is inside.
Right, but once it's mixed with water, but this is not what we're dealing
But the
with.
removal of the garments would be the same.
At the red heifer, nothing was mentioned about that.
Okay.
From a straightforward reading of Rashi's words, it is understood that the obligation to change garments involves two different concepts and rationales. The way we just said, there are 2 points that Rashi is making. A, it is a requirement stemming from the respect due to the priestly garment to ensure that the garments in which a Kohen continuously serves not be soiled when taking out the ashes. This resembles the explicit command previously stated that the priestly garments must engender honor and glory. So Rashi makes one point. When you serve God, you must be wearing very clean garments that are representing and expressing honor and glory. By the way, they're not allowed to wash them in a laundry. They will use them once and that's it. I think we should push for why? Because you want to express glory and honor. Therefore, there was no dry cleaning, there is no cleaning. So therefore, don't use them to remove the ashes because then you come back, it's all soiled. Yes.
Would they have been, would the garments that they were using to remove the ashes would have been the old garments of?
Not allowed.
Okay, so
Not allowed to
this is
use.
totally separate.
There is a whole talk about the Rebbe that God is using the word Tzav, Tzav, the beginning of the portion. There are many languages God uses when he commands. One is Vaydaber, he spoke, Vayomer, he said, Tzav. Tzav is very unusual, very few places. Tzav is when there is a very unique teaching. And here the teaching is that it's going to cost extremely large sum of expenditure. And yet God is commanding. In other words, there is a major expense involved. We studied it last year, I think, a few years back. That's a whole different talk.
Why are they characterized as inferior garments for taking out the ashes?
What?
They were characterized as inferior garments, the ones for taking out the ashes. Did you use the word inferior?
Yes, that's Rashi. Why inferior? Because he's not serving in a temple, he's walking outside. Put on.
So why bother about coming back? There's some other Cohen serve and then you go home.
He wants to continue serving. He won the lottery. Every day they do a lottery. He won the lottery for more world. You don't want to give up. It's an honor.
When we come back, that's very neutral.
No, the same one he wore in the morning.
I'm saying, yeah, but I'm saying, when he takes them off, takes the ashes out of different garments, the garments are gone forever. and
That's it.
he gets back.
If they got soiled, we assume they would get soiled, but we're not sure. In other words, there's a high chance that they'll get soiled. It's not 100%. As we'll discover, the other part that's done after every work, they did it very carefully and there was no soiling, but we will see soon.
He wears inferior clothes with ashes, and he doesn't get soiled, he's allowed to come back in them.
Not with them because they're inferior, he cannot serve his master. Yeah?
In all cases, he can.
Let's make it clear, correct. He goes to the temple and he serves God. They see that it was spilled, maybe once a week, maybe once in 2 weeks. Somebody won the lottery to be serving God for that. He goes there, he goes into his private chamber, he changed clothes, inferior clothes, he takes the ashes outside the camp, then he comes back and he changed those garments back to the one he wore in the morning so he can continue serving God.
What did he do with the garments that he usually?
They would use them for weeks, for flames, for many lights that they use in the temple.
Only the Kohanim can remove the.
Yes. No, we'll find out that even a Kohen that has a blemish can do it. We'll see in a moment, but this is a commandment in the beginning of the Torah portion. Ufoshat es bgodo, take off your garments, velovesh bgodim acherim, and get dressed with different garments. Number two, so number one is you gotta be careful. Rashi teaches us that the garments you serve God in the temple always must be very clean. And therefore, when you do a work that will bring stain to the garments, make sure you're not using those same garments. B, it is a requirement that is an element of the service of the Kohanim. They should not perform a service comparable to serving a cup of wine to one's master in garments worn while performing inferior service like cooking a pot of food for his master. Rashi says Rashi is teaching us something else. There are different categories of service in the temple. There is a category of service that's compared to butchering an animal in the kitchen, cutting the steak, igniting the fire, the flame. It makes you greasy and oily and dirty. Then there is another type of service, pouring wine in the goblet to the master. These are two separate type work. One is, we call it right now inferior because it's done in the kitchen. The other is done in front of the king. Therefore, there are two sets of garments, one for the kitchen, one for the public eye, meaning when you serve wine to your master. Did you understand that? Really?
In either case, in both cases, you need an inferior set of clothes to do the dirty work and a nicer set of clothes to do the holy work, the more important. It sounds to me like it's exactly the same.
Thank you. The Rashi is bringing an example from the kitchen, right? What is he trying to add with that? You don't understand. The Rebbe is going to ask why, but Rashi, based on the analogy Rashi is bringing, says the Rebbe, there are two points Rashi is trying to deduce. One is the garments that you serve always must be clean, period. Therefore, if you do something that will soil the garments, make sure you wear different garments. So the teaching here is only about the garments. The garments must be worn, always worn in the service of the temple, must be clean. That's one point. Do you understand that? Sure. Then Rashi is teaching us another point, and that is there are different levels of service in the temple. There is one service that requires for somebody to get soiled, and there is another type of service in which he has to do it while there is no involvement in getting dirty. And therefore, the garments must represent the type of work. It's common sense. What's the
same thing to me?
One is about the service. The first one is about the garment.
In both cases, when you're going to go to the big dog, you got to be.
Yes, in both cases, you must be clean. There is What the Rebbe wants to point out is the reason why. First point the Rashi is making is the reason is he has to change because the garments at the time he serves God must be clean. That's the reason. Second point, the reason is because God has assigned the Kohen two categories of work. One type of work he can be using while the garments are dirty. The other type of work must be in clean, like comparing to pouring wine. And therefore, it's not about the garments that must be always clean because there are garments that are going to get soiled. It's about the type of service. When a service is done in public, meaning in the temple, it must be done with clean garments. When the service is done, taking ashes outside the camp, then the service don't have to be done with clean
When the
garments.
service involves pouring wine for the master, which is important, you have to have clean garments.
Right.
Or in the kitchen, and it's not so important, and you're gonna get dirty, you have to have inferior garments.
Right.
In both cases, it's the same thing to me. I don't understand.
I said it's the same. I agree with you.
Okay.
I said to you the reasons. What?
Two examples of the same point.
Right, of course.
I think he's
There's
got-
no two opinions. Huh?
I thought he was trying to make a separate,
A separate point? I don't
two
get it.
examples for the same thing.
Yeah, it was just going.
Of course, it's two examples. The question, I think I told you when we started, we need to understand why Rashi bothers to bring two examples. It doesn't make sense. Rashi is here to explain in the simplest way. Therefore, says the Rebbe, let's dive deeper and we'll find that there are two reasons, not machloket about what need to be done, because both opinions, in both reasons, it's the same. But what makes that point? Why? Why do you need to change? One is because the garments serving in the temple must be clean. The second is because God gave us the Kohanim, two categories of work. One of them must be clean, the other is not. As the Rebbe, there are grounds for analysis why Rashi, whose commentary is not intended to present the motivating rationales for the mitzvot, but rather to explain the straightforward meaning of Scripture, felt it necessary to include both these reasons. Says the Rebbe, I don't understand why Rashi is bothered to give two reasons. Anyway, it's the same rule. The Rebbe, I'm going to give you a summary. The Torah says to us, "Uposhat es b'godav," he undressed himself, velovash b'godim acherim, and he's dressed up with new garments. Says the Rebbe, why do we need to know that he has to take off his garments? The Torah can say, velovash b'godim acherim, he needs to wear new garments. Why is the Torah says, uposhat es b'godav, you have to take off the garments, and then the Torah says you have to put on garments? Says the Rebbe, maybe Rashi was bothered with that. And Rashi comes to address that the whole point here is because the garments that you serve in temple must be very, very precious. And therefore, the emphasis is based on the special garments. So why do you wear inferior garments to carry? Because you have to protect the first set of garments. That's the only way to explain why the Torah says, Ufoshat es b'godav. The second one says Rashi. Do you understand that? Oh, very good. The second one, and therefore, but says Rashi, it says the Rebbe, this explanation will not address the example he brought about the kitchen and wine, pouring wine, it does not accommodate. Here is the Rebbe's answer. It's page 64 on the bottom. To offer an easily understood resolution, by adding the second rationale, Rashi is attempting to answer a question that arises according to a straightforward understanding of Scripture here. The verse describing the removal of the ashes comes directly after and in continuation of the description of lifting of the ashes in the previous verse. The Kohen shall put on his linen tunic and shall wear linen breeches over his flesh, he shall lift a panful of the ash produced when the fire consumed the burnt offering on the altar and place it next to the altar. In other words, the idea of removing the ashes every few days when the storage space is filled is coming right after another activity that was involved ashes. And that activity was every single burnt offering, every single sacrifice. They have to wait for it to be completely consumed. And there is a lot of wood, a lot of flesh, a lot of skin, and they have to remove it and go walk down the altar and put it in that square space for, that's part of the, so says the Rebbe. Rashi had a different question. From the sequence of the verses, it appears that the primary reason the Kohen must take care of to change his garments when later removing all the ashes is because of the cloth, the linen tunic and linen breeches that he was wearing when he first lifted the ashes. This requires clarification, says Rebbe. How is it possible to say that the reason the Kohen must remove his garments before taking out the ashes is so that they will be clean when he serves them in them? That same concern that the garments may become soiled applies when he performs the initial service of lifting the ash. Now you understand the question, Ali? Common, only the Rebbe finds it, but now when the Rebbe is asking a question, it's a common question. Common sense. A verse before, we are told that every sacrifice, at the completion of sacrifice, part of the service is to remove the ashes of the altar and put it over there next to the altar on the bottom. If so, why the Torah is asking to change garments only when it's filled up and you have to take it outside the camp? Taking it off the altar down is also a potential for soiling. Remember, the altar, the temple, the altar was outside in the courtyard where there was no roof. And there was lots of winds. And they were blowing very hard. And in Jerusalem, especially on top of the mountain. And yet, there was no requirement to change the garments. And therefore, now the Rebbe is going to explain what Rashi says, which in Rashi you will never find it, but the Rebbe is in great humility, he's putting it in Rashi. Just a minute. Harry?
But if we don't move it, the women's dimension still always with the blood, we created a very serene, calm atmosphere to carry out the Chabad.
Everything is possible. But if you talk about miracle, carrying it outside the camp should also be a miracle, no stain. There is something peculiar. The reason that if the reason of changing garments while carrying the ashes outside the camp is for the preventing the garments to be soiled, he had to do it so many times every day, taking it off the altar, and it's a ramp that he had to go down. It's also brings soil. So how come there the Torah does not ask to change? Roger?
Something of the fact that the fire of the altar was not allowed to go out. It should always be burning.
Continuous. Even when they were moving in the temple, they had a metal box that was covering the fire. Yeah.
And the fact that when the sacrifice was made, it had to be totally consumed by the fire. The creation of the ash means that the fire went out.
Well, not necessarily. I think there is one technical part you're missing. How many fires were on the altar? Do you know?
No.
A minimum 5 different ones. The altar was a platform for about 48 feet by 48 feet. It's a huge platform, about 18 feet high, 16 to 18 feet high. So you have a ramp walking by, you can walk around it. And there were at least 5 different, the main one was a huge one, and on the sides. So they can be burning many sacrifices at the same time. So if one fire went off, they still had other fires, and they can continue igniting new fires, okay? Only for one sacrifice. Only for Olah, which was a ball. Many, yeah, of course. True. Can we continue about this expulsion? True. the concern regarding soiling the garments when lifting the ash is not the same as when taking out the ashes. As Rashi states in his commentary to the Talmud, during the removal of the ashes, the priestly garments are degraded and soiled by the ashes. However, since the initial lifting of the ash only requires one full fire pan of ash each day, the priestly garments will not become soiled. Rashi explained the difference. Nevertheless, it is obvious that compared to the other services in the Beit HaMikdash, lifting the ash is not a particularly clean service. If so, why should the Kohen not remove the garments he wears when performing other services before lifting the ash? In the Talmud, not in the Torah, in the Talmud, Rashi explained there is a major distinction. He says a fire pan of ash, when you remove, it's part of the service of the sacrifice. When it's completely burnt, he does not take a broom and start sweeping the altar stuff. No, he's not doing that. He takes a it's like a dustpan. You know what a dustpan is? It has walls and a bottom, nothing. And he lifts as much as a full pan, that's it. And he goes down, that's part of the service of God, to lift up the ash. And he places there. So that's a small one, so it's more controlled. You can control yourself. When it comes to removal of the ashes, this is an accumulation of many days. They have to fill up garbage bags. Anybody try to empty out a laser printer wastebasket? No, it's like ashes. It's impossible. When we do it, sometimes on an emergency, because they give you, there is a wastebasket. In every laser printer, the commercial ones have a wastebasket. In other words, when the machine works, there is a waste of toner colors that goes into a wastebasket.
Yeah.
When it fills, they tell you replace. Sometimes by the time I call, I'm in the middle of a project, so I'm trying to be smart to empty out the wastebasket. You can see remnants over there. I put in a garbage bag and another garbage bag, and I don't even hold it. I do it from the outside. It doesn't matter. There's a cloud that spreads all over. The dust is so fine. Ashes are very similar. So when you take it out, even if you have garbage bags or you have a enclosed situation, and then you pour it into the ground, there is inevitable to get soiled. So Rashi makes that distinction. But the Rebbe says what bothers the Rebbe is that in comparison to other services in the Torah, if you tell me that the service of the removal of the ash from the temple to outside is an inferior work, and therefore it requires different type of garments. Remember the kitchen? Then the removal of the fire pan with ash from the altar should also require different garments. He should change his garments because it's an inferior type of service. It's the removal. He's not doing anything. And by the way, in the parentheses, the Rebbe makes it clear. He says that according to Rambam, Maimonides, actually they changed the garments to remove the fire pan ash from the temple, from the altar. From the altar, not from the temple. Therefore, says the Rebbe, we continue to number 3, page 66. In order to resolve this question, why removing the fire pan from the altar to outside, to down the altar, does not require the change of garment? Rashi brings the second rationale, using the analogy, the clothes worn by a servant while cooking of papat, of food for his master, should not be worn when he serves a cup of wine to his master. The first reason given, so that while taking out the ashes, he does not soil the garments in which he continuously serves, leave room to assume that lifting the ash should also be performed while wearing the same garments worn when removing the ash. Indeed, careful attention to, and Rebbe points in the wording of Rashi. However, we continue the reason, in other words, based now, Ali,
Yeah.
now you understand why there are two answers? I'm rushing a little faster from the text. Here it is. The Rebbe says, if we would be told that you have to wear garments that are clean, that's why the Torah says remove them, because you have to protect them, then I don't understand how come you remove the fire pan from the altar should be done in that same garments, it should be changed. That's why Rashi brings you another analogy. What's the analogy? When you cook in the kitchen, wear different garments than when you serve wine. What's the difference between serving a meal versus pouring wine, says the Rebbe, and the Rebbe points out from Yaakov. You listening?
Yeah.
When you serve food, all the prep must be done in soiled garments. It's not part of the actual interaction with the king, with the master. When you pour wine, there's no preparation. You have a barrel of wine, you have a bottle of wine. All you do is pour the wine. Pouring the wine is done in one type of garments. Cooking the meal is a whole different. Why? Because it's not something the king is interested. All he wants is to eat food. Says Rashi, there is a difference between cooking food in the kitchen, which is a preparation for the service, versus pouring wine, which is a service. Anything done in the temple is a service for God. It's like pouring wine. Therefore, you have to wear clean garments. And therefore, when the fire pan of the altar, it's like pouring wine, must be done with clean clothes, with special clothes. But everything that's done in the background, a preparation for serving of God, meaning the removal of the ashes to outside the camp, is not done necessarily in presence of the king, because it's done outside the temple. For that, you have to wear a different type of garments. Now we can understand why there are two explanations. The first one will accommodate why the Torah tells us take off your garments before you put a new one, to teach us that the most focus, the attention should be placed on the garments. The garments must be always clean to serve God out of dignity and honor. And therefore, they're going to get soiled. Don't use them. The second analogy Rashi is giving us is to accommodate for a technical question. How come removing the ashes outside the temple require different garments, but removal of the fire pan with the ash from the altar to downstairs don't? And Rashi tells you there is a chef who is responsible, or a restaurateur who is responsible for your meal. There are two types of activities that's involved. One done in the kitchen as a preparation, that's for the meal. One pouring of the wine, that is part of the service. So when it's coming to take it outside the temple, it's like the preparation for work, to empty it out, to prepare it for more ashes to be placed there. Therefore, you have to wear different garments. But when you pour wine, you do it in the presence of the king. Of course, when you pour wine, there is a chance you're going to get soiled. There is some water that drops that can splash. It doesn't matter. You have to wear a very fancy outfit. That's why when you remove the fire pan, you got to be very careful, but you cannot change the garments. You have to have honor and dignity outfits, and they are much superior. Did you understand that? Now you understand that? Now we can understand why the Torah says, take off the garments, and why Rashi is giving us two different explanations. We are not done yet. We got to apply to our day-to-day life. Harry, just a minute. Harry, Deacon, Roger. I do not. Right. So there are two comments I want to make. The first is the Kohanim did not pay for the garments. It came from the community, of course. The second point is, who told you they were not rich? They were extremely rich. They were very rich, and the garments were not, they didn't pay for it. Of course they did. It came from public.
They got all their food for free.
Somebody's, well, Parsons.
Right? They got, right? Thank you, Aaron.
No comments.
They got their clothes for free, they got their food for free.
The garments used
Somebody brought in
in
a lot of.
preparation for service. meaning-
Just a minute, I could not hear two voices. Dick, do you mind if Roger speak and then you'll make comments?
Right.
Roger, go ahead.
And so the garment used in the preparation for service, meaning the inferior garments, have to be clean when you perform.
When you take the ashes,
When
right?
you take ashes.
But when you go to the desert,
Right,
the wind is going to blow on your face
right,
and you're going to get all stained.
right. So do they have to change that garment?
No. When they come back,
Do they have to get rid of
course.
the garment
yes.
and have a new garment the next time they perform that service?
Yeah, but
Or-
it's done only once or twice, once a week or once in 2 weeks. Yeah.
Okay, clean it.
So they are using inferior garments. By the way, I saw that you're bothered by that. Not that they were already in the dry cleaners once. Inferior material.
Right, we understand that.
The inferior material was used, but they would get lost. That's it. It's over. By the way, it's so amazing. It's so amazing, Bob. It's so amazing that in today's world, people are thinking about expenditure. I looked at fancy paper goods, plastics that look like real. I just had dinner last night. The plastic was very hard, and I said to myself, just eating a little hot dogs. I had for dinner 3 hot dogs and a hot bun and a hot dog bun. And that plastic, I said to myself, when I think I shared with you, when I became a rabbi, I moved to LA. And I was involved with the youth. I was a youth director. I was involved in camp, 200 kids, and there were boys and girls separate camps. And I was involved. And then I was involved with the Hebrew school. I had others. So the Jewish Federation of Los Angeles, used to have an education department for Hebrew schools only because of day schools. We used to go there, and once a year, they wanted one topic to be studied by all Hebrew schools of the LA County, meaning Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, it doesn't matter, everybody. And they would pick a topic that everybody can honor your father and mother, or kashrut. Did I share that with you? So I was all for it, and we had a very large, I had like, I believe 45 or 50 students, the rabbi in charge was a rabbi of Young Israel of Century City. There is a bunch of Beverly Hills. There is Century City, a walking distance, 2 Young Israels, but both are very well busy, and both rabbis work together. There was no politics. They needed more. So the Young Israel of Beverly Hills, which was on Pico, Rabbi Uri, who was representing the federation to put it together, he got paid probably. So one day we talked about Bal Tashrit. Bal Tashrit is a commandment in the Torah not to be wasteful, not to waste. It's a Torah command. A Torah edict not to waste money or energy or time or goods. Bal Tashrit, it's a famous. So he said it's a major important because that's the time in 1990 is when recycling all came about. And it was all about Bal Tashrit, destroying trees, destroying the universe, the ozone layer, etc. So when he spoke, he said, for example, this is all the directors who are sitting around. He says, for example, when they give you paper plates, it's a real sin, Bal Tashrit, because you use it once, you throw it away. The paper. He's talking about the real paper plates. You know, the cheap paper plate that if I bought home, my wife would throw me away with the plate.
The ones that Harry buys.
So everybody, he was talking about cups, you know, the wax cups that, how can you waste? You might, the forks, plastic forks, he says you use it, you wash it. And somebody says, if we wash it, we waste water. That's the reason. He says, it's impossible. I said, at least use it 2-3 times. And we realized that he was from the old school Rabbi Uri. I knew him, I love the guy. But the reality is today, we spend so much, we don't even realize resources on day-to-day life that is wasteful. Amazing savings.
Amazing savings.
Many years back. So for example, when I go now to do a Chevra Kaddish, we have a apron. Used to be an apron that covers door-to-door stays. Since COVID, and I'm paying for it. There is with elastic that there is a apron that covers your entire sleeve. Elastic here goes all over in the back, goes all the way to the bottom. It becomes, and how much it costs? $4 a piece. It's nothing because the Chinese are making a living out of it. So to say that those garments are extremely expensive, this was time in the desert, but for today it's bobkas, literally bobkas. Anyway, just a minute, Dick, you had a comment? You forgot about it. Roger, did I answered you? Bob.
If we needed these quote inferior garments, we talk about the priestly garments, very elaborate descriptions of what the priestly garments were. There's no mention in Torah about these.
Time out. The elaborate description is about the high priest. The high priest never done this.
Okay.
The regular priest was 4 types of basic garments:
Okay.
shirt, short pants, and a garment, and that's it.
Okay.
And a belt.
Short pants?
Yeah, up to his knees. Not this short.
Short pants.
You knew he was gonna.
3/4.
But are they
Are
described?
you Ali? Are
Made
you
my day.
a Kohen, Ali?
I identify as one. I told that to Barry. He keeps asking me every day, are you a Cohen? And I identify.
Any questions?
So these garments were still not mentioned, but the inferior garments were not mentioned.
Here it says really should take a new garment. It's in the Torah. It's the beginning of this week's portion. Rashi says they were inferior based on the Talmud
So the inferior.
because they came to be soiled. Now Rashi brings another example of a butler and a chef to tell us because you serve outside, it doesn't have to be that expensive. So we have 2 reasons. I'm going to tell you the following insight can be derived. The rabbi is saying that we can derive from here, from Rashi's explanation, 2 major important lessons. One is when we are serving God, instead of pick and choose what's more important, what's less important, from the story of the taking out of the ashes outside the camp, teaches us that it doesn't matter what service of God it is. If I have an opportunity to serve God, it's very valuable, and therefore I have to do it. The second one is about reaching out to a fellow Jew, a fellow human being that needs help, that is not aware of the Torah and God's commandments. Some people can say, oh, well, I'm a teacher, I'm a professor at college, I'll only reach out to students. I study so much Torah only to people who read Hebrew, or only people who are coming to synagogue. Here, the Torah makes no distinction, and the service of God in an inferior garments is equal to those who serve God with bringing the animals on the altar and burning, because the nullification, the tenet of being a servant of God is what counts. And therefore, whatever the instructions are, we follow. And that's the lesson from the changing of garments, even though it's inferior, even though it's a preparation for the service, it's not actual service. Yet the Kohanim would love to do it, even though the garments get soiled and it's an inferior garments, to teach us that don't pick and choose, but rather do whatever God said. And that's the lesson of this week's Torah portion.